So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, John Chwat. The Foundation for the Future has a strategic plan to introduce and engage with the US Congress, government, and third parties, both in legislation and policy for the next administration, and the new 117th Congress, which is from 2021 to 2023. John Chwat is our government relations consultant and lobbyist with over 40 years of experience. He's an expert in the legislative process and will be briefly reviewing events on Capitol Hill and in government for attendees. His insights and high points on what to expect in 2021 for the foundation and space policy in this challenging congressional leadership and executive branch environment will be reviewed. In the few short weeks that I've known John, I know that he has deeply immersed himself in this topic. He can probably correct me on this number, but I think he's read at least 10 books in the last few weeks. John, please.
Thank you, Lila. I appreciate very much our presentation today. We have limited time, and so what I would like to do is to go forward in the presentation. If anyone has any questions on anything that I relay, they can certainly email and go through Tim and the foundation afterwards. My background is 40 years of activity on Capitol Hill. As a bottom line, I've held most every position as chief of staff and legislative director for congressmen on a variety of committees, mostly on armed services, appropriations, committees that impact the foundation. And I served in the government. I served in a private corporation called ComSat, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then I've been out in the private sector serving a variety of clients, both Fortune 100s, small businesses for almost 30 years of my experience. So to start off, Tim, if you could go to the next slide, please. I have Getting It Done. I'm going to go through in detail the aspects of trying to influence the Congress of the United States and the federal government. I will say that Tim will go into a little bit more detail on one of the priorities that the foundation has determined for the 117th Congress, which is called the Space Act. However, Getting It Done doesn't just include one bill. It includes working with other organizations that have like-minded interests in the space community up on Capitol Hill and in the government, but also to influence both the Congress and the government on priorities for space infrastructure, for space development, for space research, in the areas that the foundation determines is a priority. Now, passing a bill is a wonderful thing, and I've passed many bills in my career. However, it's a very hard thing, and we are now embarking in the next 4 weeks into an environment. If you understand the media and you read items about the Congress and about the administration, that is fraught with conflict. It is a very confusing process for most Americans and for those that don't follow it on a regular basis. And my position within the foundation is to assist the officers of the foundation, the members of the foundation, and those that we reach to have the Congress consider new issues and new policies that we prioritize. As far as the government is concerned, we are in a very uncertain future for the federal government. However, that will be resolved if you read the media and you understand what's going on by inaugural day. So we have about 8 more weeks of uncertainty. However, It is a very, very large constituency to advocate for passage of a major bill. There are 100 senators. There are 435 congressmen. Each has tremendous staff, which I'll go into in a minute, to influence. And there are committees and subcommittees. And then there's a process that's very, very complicated. But it is a process that needs to be impacted. In addition, in the federal government, we have a lot of federal agencies that have different jurisdictions that impact in the areas that we have to look at for next year. And there are two types of administration officials. One are political appointees. There's about 3,000 that can be filled in political appointments. Some require Congressional Senate approval from their nomination. And then there's thousands and thousands of employees all across the country that impact the issues that the foundation is seeking for the next year or 2 years. Now, on passing a bill, I put a statistic down that is very concerning. However, it doesn't scare me because I've been through this before. The 3% figure is an actual percentage of the numbers of bills that pass into public law. And just to use an example, in the last Congress, which pretty much is the same as this Congress, over 13,556 bills were introduced. So if a foundation or a corporation or anybody asks their congressman, congressperson, or senator to introduce a bill, there's certainly thousands of them out there. And only 3% of them, maybe even 2.5%, actually get signed by the president into public law. So that's a heavy lift for the foundation and for our allies in passing just one of those 13,556. And just because a bill is supported and introduced by a House sponsor and a Senate sponsor doesn't mean that it goes on its own. It needs help in its little journey towards the White House and passage in the House and Senate. And we will be going through that in a couple of minutes. Tim, if you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, the 117th Congress, that's what we have facing us in 3 weeks. At the end of the year, New Year's, on Monday, January 4th, the new Congress that goes for 2 years from 2021 to 2022 is sworn in and takes its seat. In the present results, there's approximately 222 Democrats in the House and over 211 Republicans, with about 2 or 3 seats still in controversy. The majority in the House is 218. That means if I had 218 House members, I could pass a bill. And that means that there's a very, very small, narrow margin between the Democrats coming in January and the Republicans. That is very disconcerting in getting anything done, primarily because there are fights in such a narrow margin. So it's very important to know who the leadership is to be able to influence an outcome. In the Senate, we have a similar situation that has developed. There's about 50, it's 50-50. The big election in Georgia would make it 52-48 if the Republicans win both. And that is also a very narrow margin. The margin of passing bills is 51, and in some cases it's 60 if it's very controversial. So the bottom line is that from January through next December, next year, in which the foundation will embark on its major project, there is very much controversy between the Democrats and the Republicans in control of Congress. Now, there are 100 senators, and there are 435 congressmen. And I have estimated over time that there's about 2,140 top staff people in the House, and a similar situation in the Senate. When I say top staff people, I mean the chief of staff of a member, their legislative director and legislative assistant based on different jurisdictions and what issues they take up. So what does that mean? That means that there are thousands of young, sometimes they're old, but mostly they're young staff people who run around and coordinate the offices of members of Congress, and they advise the members of Congress on different legislation, similar to the one that the foundation will be advocating for. And that's a lot of people to influence. They come and go. They don't stay more than 4 or 5 years. So that's at least 2,100 people. In the personal offices of members, the one takeaway that I would like to leave with everybody is that there is a commensurate large number for House and Senate staff in the district or in the state. These people traditionally do not have any jurisdiction over policy issues. That's mostly held in the Washington, D.C. office. And there is also a committee and subcommittee structure in the Congress that's very, very important. It is based on subject matter jurisdiction. So, for example, in both the House and Senate, there are committees that oversee space and aeronautics issues. And each of these committees, and I've determined that there's roughly 21 of these committees in the House and 21 in the Senate. And each of these committees has 6 subcommittees. And to make matters very, very complicated, a subcommittee is a very specialized subject matter that the committee has. So, for example, in the Senate, we have a Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee that holds a subcommittee on space and aeronautics. And the same thing in the House of Representatives. So I have estimated that there's about 3,428 top staff people that are in charge of these subcommittees and committees. Therefore, in order to make everybody very nervous, there's about 5,000 and change top staff people that run the Congress. Now, is the foundation going to advocate that I run around with Tim and with his officers to meet every one of those 5,000 people? I don't think so. So some people are more important than others. Out of the 435 congressmen, some are chairmen or chairs of committees or subcommittees. Some are in leadership positions. And part of what I'll be doing for the foundation is to target, in addition to allies that are in the space community, to support them, to target the right people at the right time with the right message. So you can see that the Congress is a very large structure. Now, Tim, if you can go to the next slide, please. Now, before I go to methods of influence, and of course, I apologize that the Pentagon is there. The firm that I work with, Buck McKeon, was chairman of the House Armed Services Committee for 4 years. And I'm steeped in military issues for defense contractors and so on. So I should have had a picture of a blue marble floating around somewhere, but I have the Pentagon, so I make everybody happy. So before we go into methods of influence, in addition to the Congress, since this is congressional and government, we have a executive branch that everybody understands, but with a very, very active White House and Office of Management and Budget as the CPA of the federal government. And then we have the 12 major departments that we're going to be influencing at the same time. So getting back to our methods of influence, in order to influence Congress on the Space Act, which is our primary objective, there are different points that I've put down here as to the new environment that exists because of the pandemic. Most Congress committees and members' offices are virtual. Therefore, emails and virtual meetings are very, very key, which we will be undertaking. We will have selected visits both in the district for the members to support our objectives, as well as sometimes they have meetings in Washington, D.C. And many committee hearings have the same thing that we have right now with webinars and have virtual hearings, which would need to be influenced. Tim, next slide, please. These are the targets for our main legislative purpose. When a bill is introduced for the first time, the decision by the federal agencies that are impacted by the legislation are very, very key as to whether it passes or not. Therefore, engagement with the White House and engagement with a variety of federal agencies that will be involved in our Space Act and in other policy areas is absolutely critical in the passage process. Next slide, please. This is a product of maybe a 3-hour lecture, and I'll try to do it in 1 minute because Tim has told me I have to be very, very quick. Tim, go to the next slide, please. I want to summarize the fact that both the foundation in the Space Act, which has a financial implication, as well as the allies within the space community, and the issues that involve Congress and the government, most of it is focused on a budgetary process. And for those that are involved in this process, we have 3 different fiscal years at one time that the Congress and the federal government, including the agencies, deal with. And I try to explain it in this graph in the following. So we're October 1 is the beginning of our fiscal year in Washington, D.C. And October 1 begins a new fiscal year for, we're now in the throes of the end of the fiscal 2021 process, even though we're very, very late in the process because of the fighting. So basically, we have year end in fiscal 2020. We have the end of the congressional process approving the fiscal 21 bills, which would begin October 1, but they're a little bit late. And that fiscal September 30th, 2021, at which time the next fiscal year, 2022, begins. So when the president comes the first week in February to make his State of the Union, he presents to Congress the fiscal 2022 budget, which will be approved in about 2 weeks by the Office of Management and Budget. So all of this means that the environment that we're dealing with has 3 different funding levels and many, many other types of budgetary situations that you can see in the media, but we're involved in it in Washington, D.C. on a regular basis. And that, Tim, if we can go to the next slide, please. Now, there are some very important outside influences that will impact on our Space Act issues. One will be constituents that are involved in the state and also in the district that is represented by different congressmen and senators. The second would be business interests in which the Congress and the federal government listen to very, very greatly. And of course, the last large constituency would be academia and research. All of these combine into a great influence category. Next slide, please. I wanted to make some overall conclusions that are very, very important, I think. The Space Act, again, which Tim will go into in detail after my presentation, the Space Act is one bill, but a very important bill that focuses in a new way for space development and space financing. And it is based on a precedent, an historical precedent that Congress is well aware of and which has been supported by presidents and administrations in years past. We have used as a guide, an historic guide, the Tennessee Valley Authority, which during the Depression was created by Congress to offer new innovative electrical power and dams to a region in the United States that was devastated by floods. And the federal government stepped in and they created a federally chartered, very unique kind of quasi-government corporate entity. And there's been many, many, many quasi-government, public, private, federally chartered corporations in our history. The most recent one I was involved in, and that was the Communications Satellite Corporation, ComSat, which was created by Congress in 1962 as a result of 20 years of research dealing with geostationary satellites and the great need to develop an international telecommunications capability. Both AT&T were very prominent in some of the major telecom companies. And to make a long story short, Congress passed a federally chartered corporation in 1962, and eventually in 1999, it was sold to Lockheed Martin, and the rest is history. The foundation will embark on a very unique project. It is based in Title 31 of the United States Code. Title 31 of the United States Code deals with federally chartered corporations. And as such, we will be embarking in areas that not are traditionally in the aeronautic space area. So for example, there are at least 6 committees of Congress that have jurisdiction over new federally chartered corporations in that Title 31 area, whether they're financial services or banking. And there's also maybe 2 or 3 committees and subcommittees that come to my mind in which they will be considering such legislation. So it provides a very unique opportunity to engage on all things space infrastructure and space development. This brings up one of the last points that I wanted to make before any questions, and that is that there are many, many other policy and legislative items that will come up during the next year in the first session of the 117th Congress, and indeed will come up if there's a transitional period in the administration, both in policy and in executive orders. Now, one area that I know will come up, I've dealt with the leadership in Congress on this, and that is an infrastructure, a major trillion-dollar infrastructure, but infrastructure on the earth. And this needs to be influenced to present the foundation's point of view that there is also an infrastructure in space. There's also going to be a major effort in national security as it relates to space. I believe that last week, the planting of the Chinese flag on the moon creates the same kind of image with many members of Congress that I deal with in the armed services, intelligence, and national defense area, that Sputnik and Yuri Gagarin, if all of you may not be as old as I am, but you remember that Sputnik created a great movement in the Congress to support the president, and Yuri Gagarin's flight created John Glenn's and the astronaut and Apollo movement, not in competition with Russia, but to preserve America's primacy in space. And I mention this because I think this is a major area. National security in space directly impacts the Chinese, but also has other implications for other countries. The third and last are different bills that are introduced during the budget process that I have presented to you. There will be NASA's fiscal 22 budget requests that the Congress will start to look at in March and April and May and June. There will be other bills that will be introduced that support both the moon and the Mars activities. And these, the foundations will also consider as we go along. So at this point, I am open to any questions if any of the attendees have any questions on the topics that I have brought up. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I appreciate your comment. Really do appreciate you coming on and sharing your background and insight with us. That 40-year career is serving the foundation well, so really appreciate that. I would like to dig a little deeper into the specific organizations. I know that we're not the Tennessee Valley Authority. I know we're not ComSat. Could you kind of differentiate for our audience, give a little bit of background about those organizations a little bit deeper, please, and then describe why we're not those things, but why we keep comparing ourselves to those things?
Well, thank you for the question. Number one, I bring those up, the TVA and ComSat, and believe me, there's at least 10 or 12 other major federally chartered corporations, merely as a guide that will be presented to Congress, showing that there have been past efforts which succeeded in Congress supporting initiatives that at the time seemed very futuristic, so to speak, to create an entire structure to electrify an area in the Tennessee Valley that was under flood, actually. Many of the people, if you read the history, didn't believe that the TVA was supposed to be created. And after a while, the creation of the dams and the electrification and all of the resulting activity was very highly successful. And as far as ComSat is concerned, based on research, it was still unproven about whether a geostationary satellite system could create that telecommunications coordinated effort and the federally chartered company. So the foundation is not advocating that they particularly be the to be the space corporation, or we call it Space Corp. It is advocating a concept that Congress can look at and create based on past precedent, the same type of entity that could be involved in financing and infrastructure development and other activities that Tim will go into more detail. And that is the rationale for a federally chartered corporation. There are some other concepts that are being or that will be considered in addition to our proposal, and that is an infrastructure bank. There's a major effort, and again, I mentioned this, it's on Earth, it's infrastructure on Earth, but there's a major effort by many unions, by many of our Democratic colleagues and friends to create an infrastructure bank to provide infrastructure financing for highways and airports and so on. And then there's another proposal that's going to be considered, and that is a spaceport development corporation. And that relates to the launch facilities in 3 or 4 locations to privatize them. Ours is different from that.
Those are really exciting proposals. I can't tell you how, I spent a lot of time thinking about the future, right? In great big capital letters with exclamation points of the future. But this feels very near term and very possible, right? This year, next year, the year after that, 2025, we've couched our whole program between 2020 and 2035. But this kind of adrenaline boost to space architecture and space infrastructure would be pretty dramatic. So we're rooting you on.
Yeah, Michael, I do want to make a comment because I just remembered in 1962, and of course I go back to Andrew Jackson. That's how far back I go. So, but in 1962, there were 2 propellants in Congress quickly passing that communications satellite corporation. Number one were the major corporations, American companies like AT&T, that stepped forward and said, we need this federally chartered corporation in order to enhance America's telecommunications capability. So we have that component for the Space Corporation. And the second propellant was American preeminence in the international telecommunications area. And that led to ComSat, eventually led to Intelsat. And there's a nice big Intelsat building in Virginia where I live. That is the world headquarters for all the international telecommunications company of which America is a member and which ComSat used to be the American representative. So it's very exciting. This is a very, very exciting, the Space Act is a concept that I'm sure the foundation will begin to make it a reality.
I'm curious, taking off your official hat for a second, when you were working at ComSat, could you imagine a world where we have 4,000 satellites circling the planet and then moving to 100,000 satellites in the next 10 years or so? Was that even in your imagination?
No. And when I worked there as a lobbyist, it was excruciating to try to convince, for example, the Inmarsat, International Maritime Telecommunications. The ships were sinking off the coasts all over the world, and we wanted to put a satellite a component on ships to mandate that. Mm-hmm. And I just can't tell you the jurisdictions that we had to go through. It was a nightmare, and that's just one satellite system. So we never imagined it, and so I think it's very exciting. This new concept.
Well, thank you. Yes. I know that you are stressed for time a little bit today.
Well, I have a little bit of time. I can, overshoot five minutes if there's.
There are a few questions, if you don't mind.
Sure. Maybe you could repeat them for me. It would be great.
Yeah. Yes, sir. One is more kind of community based. So, from Charles, does the public being excited and supporting a particular space effort with enthusiasm and communicating with Congress directly help with pushing the space law forward?
Yes, absolutely. I use the word constituent in my presentation. And if you live in a district and you live in a state, the influence that you can bring to bear to even a new member of Congress is just tremendous. And I'll give you two examples. One, last week, I informed Tim and the foundation that at noon on, I think it was Thursday, I forgot, but a former astronaut, former captain in the Navy, was sworn in as the new senator from Arizona to take the place of the death of Senator McCain, even though he has to run again in 2022. But the bottom line is Mark Kelly is a new senator, and everyone in Arizona, if they are, out there listening or whatever, that's important. And of course, there was another senator, a new senator that's coming in, Bill Hagerty, who has military background. He's a senator from Tennessee. And I have many, many examples of, the over 50 new House members and many senators. So yes, it's very, very important to be a constituent. And we'll help people if they want to support our Space Act and other projects up on Capitol Hill.
I'm going to throw a pitch to Tim that the folks on this call are encouraged to get involved with this effort. This is not going to be easy. Nothing in space is easy, and especially nothing on Capitol Hill relating to space is easy. So we're going to be pushing pretty hard on this. It is one of the main reasons we're hosting this series of events over the course of the next year. So any help on that would be greatly appreciated. I know we have some international folks on this call as well. I'm not sure how y'all can help, but I'm sure we can be creative. What we really want is folks to work with the foundation.
I will say this, Michael, I'll forget, when Congress created the Communications Satellite Corporation, same thing with the Space Corp, there was an international component that eventually morphed into the Intelsat, an international component of the ComSat Corporation. And of course, Congress and we will be looking at that international component for the Space Corporation as well.
Terrific. There's one question, and I want to stress that Tim has sent out a memo saying that we are aggressively nonpartisan. So I want to put that caveat in there before I ask this question. But one of the questions is, how can we keep space from being a war zone? And I know that is, it's not really, that would have been probably a better question for yesterday's Speaker General Quast, but if you'd like to tackle it, or you can pass on it if you like.
I never pass on anything. That's why I have longevity. When you say war, when the person says war zone, I'm going to give two answers. One, a war zone in a political sense is extremely important because that shows the commitment by Congress and by the American government in various policies that will impact the foundation's presentations. So we must avoid a refocus of space primacy by the United States away from projects that will not support space development, space infrastructure, space exploration. That is key because there were previous administrations that that focus sort of left a little bit, and we'll be watching that as we go along. Now, also with the use of war, I did comment about national security, and that's also a very, very big topic, which the foundation will be looking at as well.
Terrific. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much, John.
Thank you, Lila. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Michael. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you, John.